Hello everyone, welcome to Nashville, Tennessee for day 3 of Pro Tour Amonkhet. Rich Hagan, Maria Bartholdi, your co-hosts here, alongside the very dapper-looking Hall of Famer, Mr. Luis Scott Vargas. We have got such a top 8 for you. No lie, the way the last rounds of Swiss happened on Saturday have brought us an epic octet for day 3. Maria, what are you most looking forward to here on Pro Tour Sunday?
This is a stacked top 8, Rich. I mean, 21 Pro Tour top 8s among the lot of them, but no wins. So I'm excited to see who can pull out the first one for this team.
Wow. Luis, what about you? What do you see the shape of Sunday being?
The storyline of Sunday is going to be zombies versus marvels. Who comes out ahead? Whether Ulamog defeats Lord of the Accursed is something we're going to find out.
All right, well, so that's the sort of the big headline. Why don't we take a look for the first time today at our bracket, and we'll mark your card for what you can expect to see over the next 3, 5, 6, 8 hours of outstanding Magic action. So we're going to begin in the top half of the bracket. Quarterfinals 1 and 2 will be down in the feature match area behind us very shortly. That's going to be Chris Fennell with White Black Zombies against Yuya Watanabe with Team Aetherworks Marvel, and Christian Calcano with Mono Black Zombies against Martin Müller's version of Team Aetherworks Marvel. We'll hold games pretty aggressively, so you'll see a lot of both of those matches, and of course you'll see both those matches decided live on camera. Then the second part of the morning, we go to the bottom half of the bracket. Tobiash against Thompson, Yukihiro against Frolic, more Aetherworks Marvel, more Mono Black Zombies, plus the one sort of unusual deck here in the top 8 as far as the big archetypes go, Ken Yukihiro of Japan with his black-green energy. Then we'll show you semi-final 1 in entirety, then semi-final 2. Sometime this afternoon, we'll have a champion for $50,000 US. But to get there, we need some semi-finalists. Why don't we start with quarterfinal 1? Maria, who have we got?
All right, let's take a look at Chris Fennell playing White Black Zombies on Team Lingering Souls. This is his second Pro Tour top 8. His last was a 7th place finish at Pro Tour Born of the Gods. He has 9 GP top 8s under his belt, just 31 years old. Lifetime earnings, $61,800. Not too shabby. He is a silver pro. There's a look at Chris Fennell, but what we're most interested in, perhaps, is his deck, which he brought a really interesting deck to this tournament, White Black Zombies. Luis, how does this deck work?
Well, like the Mono Black Zombies deck, they're trying to flood the field full of zombies. It's got a bunch of cards that give all your zombies +1, +1, cards that trigger on playing a zombie, and just a lot of zombies.
So my question is, since a lot of players out in the field are playing Mono Black Zombies, what does the addition of white to his deck get him?
It gets him a little bit more interaction, ways to win through blockers, something like Wayward Servant, for example, slightly better removal in the form of Anguished Unmaking, and a card we've seen a lot of so far, Gideon Ally of Zendikar, though not a whole lot in this top 8.
Interesting.
All right, so that's Chris Fennell, and you got to look at the list there, and it is zombie, 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 zombie. Yes. All right, let's get away from zombies. Let's talk about Yuya Watanabe, shall we? One of the finest players Japan has ever produced, the 28-year-old from Japan. He's in the Hall of Fame. Of course, he's a Platinum Pro. Just the $319,000 and change still going on. 4-time Japanese national champion, which is just fantastic because that is a hard tournament to win. 6 Grand Prix titles from his 25 top 8s, which is again a fantastic rate there. So what about his deck? He's playing for Team Masashi. They've got 2 in the top 8. Here's his list. And as you can see, well, we call it Teamer, and that's because of the green, the blue, and the red. That's how we end up as that sort of designation. Luis, walk us through what Yuya Watanabe's deck is and what it's trying to do.
Well, Aetherworks Marvel is the headliner here, and his goal is to get up to 6 energy, play Aetherworks Marvel, spin the wheel, as we like to call it, activate it, and hopefully hit Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger. But save that, you still get to play a lot of cards that give you energy, Whirler Virtuoso, Rogue Refiner, Glimmer of Genius, and take more looks with Marvel.
You mentioned Glimmer of Genius there, and just looking at this list, there's a lot of spells going on. There are a lot of different ways, and we're going to get into it through the day, different ways to build the Aetherworks Marvel deck. What's the value in playing, for example, full Glimmer of Genius and so on?
Yuya has more interaction, more spells, especially instants, cards like Censor, Dissenter's Deliverance, and Glimmer of Genius. He tends to keep his mana untapped and isn't playing to the board quite as much as a deck like, say, Tobiash's.
Okay, so more of a draw, go, feel, and wait to see and then respond.
Exactly.
Which for a great player is where you want to be because you want to give yourself as many choices as possible, I guess. All right, so that's quarterfinal 1. Fennell against Watanabe, Black White Zombies against Team of Marvel. Why don't we head into quarterfinal 2, Maria?
All right, let's take a look at Christian Calcano playing Mono Black Zombies, playing for Team MTG Bent Card, only 28 years old, 244 lifetime pro points, almost $50,000 in lifetime earnings. And did you know this? He has played in 144 Grand Prix to date since 2004. This guy is a grinder. He has been going at it for a long time and he loves the game. First at Grand Prix Minneapolis in 2012, first at Grand Prix Atlantic City 2015, a gold pro. Christian Calcano. Let's take a look at his deck. All right, Luis, tell us the story of Mono Black Zombies.
Well, very thematically, this is trying to assemble a horde of the undead and run over the opponent. Cards like Metallic Mimic, Diregraph Colossus, Lord of the Accursed, they all just give you these big rewards for playing tons of zombies. And it gets to harness really powerful cards like Dark Salvation, which can remove blockers and, again, put more zombies into play.
So he's going to be playing against Teamer Marvel. I want to know how this deck matches up against Marvel and what tools it has in its toolbox to defeat something like Ulamog.
For the most part, in Game 1, it's just a race. The zombie deck is trying to get ahead of Marvel, hope it doesn't hit a turn 4 Ulamog, and just go wide, go around it. The instants and sorceries in this deck don't interact all that well with Marvel. Fatal Push, Grasp of Darkness, and Dark Salvation are just not where you want to be, so it's really whether Calcano can outrace Marvel.
Okay.
All right, well, we need to find out whether Ether does work, and to do that, we're in the company of Martin Müller of Denmark. Now, he, the Genesis, is the team for him. He is just 19 years old. Incidentally, all 8 of our players this weekend are on one of the pro teams in the team series. So turns out teams do pay off, very definitely. He's 19 years old, 146 lifetime pro points already, and this is his second Pro Tour Top 8, and of course a World Magic Cup champion from the Dane Blast squad, Thomas Enervoldsen, Simon Nielsen amongst those as well. He was the national champion in 2014, and he has not stopped since. So, as we mentioned, his deck is a Teamer Aetherworks Marvel list. Let's take a look and give you a sense of, in particular, Luis, because I presume the basic plan is the same. Make a Marvel, spin the wheel, get yourself to an Ulamog. So what's different?
The standout card here in the Genesis deck list is 4 copies of Chandra Flamecaller. She's a kind of underused Planeswalker right now. She saw a lot of play last year, but in this field, being able to sweep the board against a deck like, say, Zombies, which he'll be facing, is very valuable. And against other decks, her 0 ability lets you discard these Ulamogs that the Marvel players always seem to draw.
Yeah, and just looking again on screen there, you see number of instants, well, just 4 copies of Harness Lightning, whereas that central column in Yuya Watanabe's list was just going on and on and on with Glimmer of Genius and so on. So he is much less interactive, but then if he's saying, well, I'm going to present you a really significant Planeswalker threat.
Yeah, Martin plays much more to the board. His opponents know what's going on, but Chandra's such a powerful card that doesn't really matter. That extra knowledge doesn't help them. All
right, so on the spot, Luis, give me a winner, Fennell Watanabe.
I'm going to go with Watanabe here.
Okay, and Calcano Muller?
I think Muller has an advantage. Calcano is the fan favorite. I think that's very safe to say. But I think deck-wise, I think Martin Müller's ahead.
Okay, well, let's see whether the Marvel can be marvelous here in the first 2 quarterfinals. It's time to head down to the floor for Pro Tour Amonkhet.
Welcome to this, the first set of quarterfinals here at Pro Tour Amonkhet. We've already heard about the players, we've seen the decks. Let's head down to the floor and see how it plays out. Hello and welcome to this, the first set of quarterfinals here at Pro Tour Amonkhet. You can see our feature match area where previously there were 4 tables, just 2 now, and soon enough, just the tables for the final. But to get there, these players are going to have to get through a couple more very tough opponents. We're going to be starting in a very, very high power feature match indeed. Let's see our first player. There he is, Chris Fennell, absolutely romped through this field in the Swiss, barely picking up a loss across the entire tournament, and as such, he gets the privilege of being able to play first with his black-white zombies against this man, Yuuya Watanabe, when one of the all-time greats of the game sneaks into the top 8. In 8th place, the entire rest of the top 8 has to be a little bit worried. Playing Team Aetherworks Marvel, Chris Fennell on the play. Are his zombies going to be able to get him there, Ian?
We will see, Tim. I mean, he's definitely brought his deck with this matchup in mind. Has cited Anguish Unmaking as one of the key cards here. We'll see if that does come up in this matchup as both players are underway. No 1-drop or 2-drop for Chris Fennell. That's not a great start for him there, Tim. He really wants to get on board early and apply pressure to Yuya as quickly as possible.
He may find himself in trouble here. Fennell starting on 6 cards, and we know there's a couple of copies of Censor in hand for Yuya Watanabe. The first one getting fired off on Lord of the Cursed there. And without an early thread in the first 2 turns, it means that those Censors absolutely premium counter magic. Sometimes you just end up cycling them, but here as a force spike, they're keeping Chris Fennell from his early beatdown plan, and that's one of the important phases of this game.
Yeah, look how big of a swing this is here, Tim. With Chris Fennell missing both his 1-drop and his 2-drop and only trying to get on board on turn 3, Yuya was actually able to just censor Chris Fennell's first play. Imagine how different this board state would look if Chris Fennell had 2 more creatures on the battlefield already.
And with no 4th land, another Censor dealing with another Lord of the Accursed. This is exactly what Yuya Watanabe will have been hoping for, because ultimately his hand didn't have too much action when he started. He had a lot of lands, a couple of copies of Censor, and this has bought him the time to really make sure that he's not going to lose to one of the things that this Zombies deck can do, which is provide early pressure.
Indeed, and it's been actually astounding to me how well Yuya's deck can play almost like a blue-red control deck. You know, he's got counter magic, he's got Glimmer of Genius and so forth. So he can actually just kind of play that defensive 1-for-1 removal game. But hold on here, Tim. He's actually added Aetherworks Marvel to the battlefield.
Aetherworks Marvel, crucially, with no energy just yet. Watanabe's list a little bit lighter on energy producers than some of the other lists we've seen in the field. It might take him a bit of time to get up to 6 energy, but once he does, spinning that wheel is a dangerous time. Binding Mummy coming down for Chris Fennell. Being able to tap other creatures, potentially kind of relevant, but right now, he's got to just get some damage in. Rogue Refiner there coming from Watanabe, drawing him a card. The first energy on the board for him, Ether Hub, adding to that, up to 3, halfway there.
And look at how this game is shaping up. Yuya already has a stronger board than Chris Fennell, as well as having resolved his deck's namesake, Aetherworks Marvel. So he is in good shape. Just needs to generate a little bit more energy and make sure Chris Fennell can't get any traction on the board. And if we take a look at Yuya's hand here, he's actually sitting on a copy of Harness Lightning and Torrential Gearhulk, which is going to mean he has answers to Chris Fennell's next couple creatures.
Unfortunate, would have to use the Ether Hub to generate energy to generate the red mana using energy, meaning that it's not quite straightforward for him to get to the full 6 energy simply by casting his removal here.
So big play here. Chris Fennell goes for a Dark Salvation for 1. That would give him his 2nd zombie and would give the Rogue Refiner -2/-2, but Yuya has a response. He's going for a Harness Lightning on the Binding Mummy. What that's going to do is not only kill the Binding Mummy, but also make it so the Dark Salvation doesn't actually take out that Rogue Refiner.
A big swing there. Ultimately sort of net evens on energy there. Had to spend 1 energy to get red mana in the first place. Fatal Push does deal with Rogue Refiner.
But even that meant Chris Fennell had to spend 2 spells just to take out Yuya's Rogue Refiner, which had already cantripped, already drawn him a card, already given him extra energy, and Chris Fennell sitting on just a lonely zombie token there. Looks like Yuya is rapidly gaining control of this game. He also has 6 mana untapped now, representing Torrential Gearhulk. Could flashback, Harness Lightning, kill off a creature. Could also flashback the Censor if Chris Fennell goes for, say, a 5th land and a Liliana's Mastery, for example. It's going to be a tough uphill battle for Chris Fennell from here.
And yeah, there's not really too much that Chris has going on the board. However, it's probably worth talking a little bit about what makes the White-Black Zombies deck more interesting against Aetherworks Marvel in Game 1. If it does work out that Watanabe spins the wheel, finds an Ulamog, there's still the potential that Fennell can come back because he does have access to some powerful removal.
Yeah, time and again, Chris Fennell has cited Anguished Unmaking as there's just a key card for this matchup and one of the key reasons that he actually added white to his deck. Anguished Unmaking allows him to answer an Aetherworks Marvel. You know, say Yuya goes for a spin and misses, then Chris Fennell can follow up with an Anguished Unmaking on Aetherworks Marvel, or can actually take out a Resolved Ulamog, as long as the Ulamog's cast trigger hasn't done too much damage to Chris's battlefield.
Nice sequence of plays here for Chris. He starts off with a Dark Salvation to make a second zombie and then a Crypt Breaker. He's got 3 zombies. With Crypt Breaker, he can tap all 3 of them. It'll cost him a life, but he gets to draw a card, and that's the sort of deal that most Magic players will take time and again.
So interestingly, Yuya had the option to Torrential Gearhulk and censor the Crypt Breaker, I believe there, but instead is going to go for a Harness Lightning. And the reason he's going for that is, although it allows Chris to draw an extra card, having resolved the Crypt Breaker, it allows Yuya to generate extra energy from using the Harness Lightning to kill it after the fact rather than countering it with Censor. And that's going to allow for an Aetherworks Marvel spin right here in Chris Fennell's end step. So looking at 6 cards is Yuya, and we will see what he comes up with. He's looking for Ulamog. I may have seen it in there. Let's see what he comes up with.
Worth noting that the Musashi build of Aetherworks Marvel doesn't have quite as many big hits for the Marvel as some of the other lists we've seen. 3 copies of Ulamog in there, 1 Torrential Gearhulk, that's obviously already in play, but still a lot of value that can be generated with this. And with this Glimmer of Genius, Yuuya Watanabe will be halfway there to being able to spin the wheel again soon enough.
So no Ulamog just yet for Yuya, but he does have Glimmer of Genius, as you said, Tim. He's going to get a little card selection here, scry 2, set up his next draws, also refills 2 energy, putting him back up to 3. So as you said, we could see another spin of the Aetherworks Marvel as soon as this next turn for Yuya. And remember, this is still all in Chris Fennell's end step, so Yuya's going to get to untap. He's drawing 2 cards from Glimmer, plus 1 more from his turn.
Yeah, Attune with Ether there, one of the draws. I think that's the one that he left on top. Attune with Ether just generating extra energy, thinning his deck, letting him shuffle, sometimes relevant if you've seen lots of good cards off your Aetherworks Marvel. A really important piece of the puzzle, the Attune with Ether, when it comes to how this deck is put together. Does mean that you can make sure you consistently hit the mana that you need, and generating 2 energy at such a low cost, very, very important to the deck.
So taking a look at the remaining cards in Yuya's hand, he does have 2 more copies of Glimmer of Genius, as well as a Harness Lightning. That kind of gives his bases covered here. He's got some interaction for whatever Chris's next proactive play is going to be. And if Chris doesn't make a big move, you know, he can spend his mana on Glimmer of Genius. He will be able to get another spin of the Marvel this turn. So things looking, again, really, really good for Yuya here. Now, thinking from Chris Fennell's side of the battlefield, what does he need to happen in order to get out of this? Well, I think, you know, from his perspective, he's really just hoping that Yuya doesn't have a lot going on in terms of ways to interact. And, you know, if Chris Fennell can, say, land Liliana's Mastery, boosting up his board a lot and just kind of apply pressure to Yuya here, that's going to be his best way to win. But that frankly doesn't look too likely to me, given the board state here, Tim.
And we see Glimmer of Genius being played during combat, generating the extra energy needed for a spin of the Aetherworks Marvel, because that does mean that if the likes of Ulamog comes along, it's going to be able to both block and deal with a few permanents on the battlefield otherwise.
So it looks like no Ulamog yet again. There is a Whirler Virtuoso, is a decent pick. I think I see a Rogue Refiner also, if Yuya just wants to kind of cycle through his deck more and draw some more cards. Both are great options.
There's also the one of Kozilek's Return there. Could just choose to clear the board for now, get Kozilek's Return in the graveyard for later.
I think he's going to get better value out of one of the creatures here, and he does go with Whirler Virtuoso. That's going to allow him to block and pick off one of those zombies, and also gives him an extra way to spend his energy. You know, if he decides to just shift gears and make a bunch of Thopters and just attack Chris Fennell in the air, that's totally reasonable as well.
Yeah, knowing that he has another Glimmer of Genius in hand, he's able to say, 4 energy is pretty good because it takes me 2/3 of the way to yet another spin of the wheel. Watanabe's deck doesn't necessarily need to hit Ulamog on the very first try, because it's able to consistently use the value that it gets to get still more attempts. A big Diagraph Colossus here, because there are so many zombies already in the graveyard, it's coming into play with 4 +1/+1 counters, and from now on, every zombie that Fernell plays will bring a friend with it. Dissenter's Deliverance there, just getting cycled. Not too many targets for it in this particular matchup, at least pre-sideboarding.
Now, Yuya has a couple options here. He can use that Harness Lightning in his hand to take out the Diagraph Colossus. The problem with that line of play is he's going to spend so much energy doing it. I feel like he might as well just put that energy into Aetherworks Marvel and hope to hit an Ulamog. He's already spun the Marvel once since the last time he shuffled, so he knows he's put a lot of non-Ulamog cards on the bottom of his library, and he has a better idea of a higher Ulamog density left in the cards to come, if that makes any sense to you. And if he can hit that Ulamog, that's just going to take care of the Diagraph Colossus incidentally as well, in addition to providing a win condition. So I like that. I like just building up his energy here a bit more than trying to answer the Diagraph directly.
Watanabe does need to have a little think here about when he wants to activate Aetherworks Marvel, because if he did use it immediately, it means that there's the potential to get attacks in this turn where otherwise he wouldn't be able to.
Now, it's also worth noting that Yuya is getting pretty high on land count here, and his deck is actually quite good at just hard casting Ulamog. He does have Shrine of the Forsaken Gods, which can provide 2 mana towards an Ulamog, so not far off. But it looks like he does go with a Harness Lightning on the Diagraph Colossus. Just wants to take that out before any kind of shenanigans can happen, making multiple zombies in one turn. Looks like Yuya is actually just content to press his advantage with his board here. I mean, Torrential Gearhulk, it's easy to forget, but that can apply a lot of pressure just on its own very quickly.
Fennell now facing lethal.
So Yuya's kind of got this game locked up in multiple ways at once. You know, even with just his board of the Whirler Virtuoso and the Torrential Gearhulk, you know, that's probably going to be enough to defeat Chris just on its own. But, you know, if anything should go wrong with that plan, he's still got that Aetherworks Marvel in play. He's still got a healthy amount of energy there and more ways to get even more energy. So we could be looking at the final turns here, Tim.
It looks a little bit that way. A Wayward Servant, the pickup there for Chris Fernell on his turn. That one, there are matchups where it can feel fantastic, but right now, a relatively low impact draw for him. And there's been a Liliana's Mastery in hand for Chris Fernell for this entire game. He's never got past the 4th land and has to look on as his Wayward Servant is responded to with a Glimmer of Genius. That's 6 energy. 2 going to the bottom for Yuya Watanabe. He doesn't like the look of those.
And this has been a painful game to watch from Chris's perspective. You know, he's sort of just been trying to claw his way into some possibility of winning this game almost since, you know, the early turns. But we have to remember, Tim, Chris's initial draw was quite poor this game. I believe he was on a mulligan to 6. He had no action until turn 3. That was met with a censor from Yuya. So even though this game did not look very impressive from Chris's side of the battlefield, I think we're going to see a lot more out of him coming in this best of 5, especially once we hit the sideboard games.
Yeah, the first 2 games are going to be played pre-sideboarding. So right now, we're going to see another game after this in the same configuration. Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot coming off the Aetherworks Marvel. Doesn't look like anything special, but to be perfectly honest, Yuya Watanabe does not need anything special at this point. Gets 3 energy from the Puzzle Knot, and of course, sacrificing it will be enough to get a spin of the wheel. Simply casts Ulamog, and with a...
to have Ulamog in it. You haven't hit it. I'm just waiting for you to do it. Just a little bit. Yeah.
A little chuckle from Chris Fernell there. He knew that his number was up. It was just a matter of how. We are going to be able to bring you plenty more magic, including our second match that's going on over here soon enough. But first, these messages.
Always know the right play to make? Show off your skills at a local preliminary Pro Tour qualifier. With over 500 game stores worldwide running PPTQs, find an event near you at magic.wizards.com/PPTQ. Grand Prix events offer great experiences for players of all skill levels. These Magic celebrations are headlined by 2-day open tournaments with pro players, feature top artist signings, and host a wide range of side events. Find an upcoming Grand Prix event near you at magic.wizards.com/Grand Prix.
Hello and welcome back to this first set of quarterfinals here at Pro Tour Amonkhet. We've already seen game one between Chris Fennell and Yuuya Watanabe, where Team Etherworks Marvel taking it down in relative ease. We're going to get a chance to jump back and watch our other match that's going on. They're about to start game two. Christian Calcano against Martin Müller, and it's on the face of things a broadly similar matchup, but there's actually a few key differences. Christian Calcano, there you see him, he's already a game down with his mono black zombies against the Team Etherworks Marvel of Martin Müller from Denmark, Team Genesis. This is the matchup where the Zombies deck is a mono black deck, so has a tougher time in terms of removing the key threats of Etherworks Marvel. There's also Chandra on the other side, who is great at clearing boards of all sorts of zombies.
Indeed, Tim. Martin Müller's Etherworks deck is actually quite different from Yuya's. Well, Yuya's deck is very spell-heavy, plays almost like a blue-red control deck, and is also very much all in on hitting specifically Ulamog off of Etherworks Marvel. Martin Müller has more live hits here in the form of Chandra Flamecaller from Oath of the Gatewatch, who also happens to be excellent at sweeping away lots of zombies with her -X ability.
Well, Christian Calcano off to an aggro start here, kicking things off with Dread Wanderer and then that Metallic Mimic, which I'm sure will be naming Zombie. Basically, this is the beatdown draw. He's got a 2-1 on turn 1. He's got a 2-1 on turn 2 that's going to pump each of his subsequent zombies that come into play. He's going to be looking to get plenty of damage in where he can, and that Harness Lightning from Martin Müller, not what he wanted to see. Müller generating 2 energy in the meantime while killing off Metallic Mimic, only taking 2 points from the Dread Wanderer. This is not exactly how Christian Calcano drew it up. He wants to be taking these early turns of the game to give Martin Müller pause about his life total.
Yeah, I actually think things were looking really nice for Calcano there with 1 drop into 2 drop. Unfortunately, flagging a little bit on turn 3, he's only able to add a Crypt Breaker to the battlefield. And this is, sort of the problem that we saw last match between Chris Fennell and Yuuya Watanabe, but to a much lesser degree. I mean, Fennell wasn't able to get on board at all until turn 3. And was met with a sensor at that point. So Calcano at least having more pressure this game and threatening to get some Crypt Breaker activations pretty early, which is one of the key cards in this matchup. If a Crypt Breaker goes unanswered, that's just going to provide a flow of card advantage and really help the Zombies deck kind of start to spiral out of control from Martin Müller's perspective.
Yeah, sometimes a bit of a challenge to figure out how best to play the games out when you've got Crypt Breaker in play, because you can either be beating down or you can be tapping those zombies to draw additional cards. And typically I've found that the zombies players are quite keen to just draw those cards, because with those cards it means they can flood the board still further, and at some point that just becomes untenable to answer.
Yeah, that's very, very true, especially against Marvel decks that don't have any sweepers in game, in the pre-sideboard games, I should say. Things are a little bit different in this matchup. Normally what the Zombies deck would want to do is just get a Crypt Breaker on the battlefield, draw a bunch of cards, and then start playing, anthem effects, as we call them, things that are giving all of your zombies +1/+1, and sort of just make their onboard power explode all of a sudden and then kill their opponent once they've drawn a lot of cards. That plan doesn't work quite as well for Calcano here in these pre-sideboard games against Martin Müller, again, because of the presence of Chandra Flamecaller. If Calcano invests a lot of resources into building up a big board before he starts to put pressure on Müller, Chandra could come down and just sweep away all that work, undo all that work that he's been working on throughout the game.
So a couple of things have come up. Firstly, an Ether Meltdown on that Dread Wanderer, meaning that it will almost assuredly be helping tap to draw cards from the time being. But Westphal Abbey in the land section for Christian Calcano, a very interesting one. He has the potential to sacrifice 5 creatures, generate a transformation on his Westphal Abbey, and once Westphal Abbey turns into Ormondal Profane Prince, that is a path to victory for some of these Zombies decks.
And in the meantime, you can see that Calcano has gone for a Dark Salvation just to make 1 zombie, not to kill anything, not to make multiple zombies, but just to get a 2/2 zombie there. And the reason he's doing that is to get a 3rd zombie onto the battlefield to start using his Crypt Breaker. You can see the Dread Wanderer is under an Ether Meltdown already, so it's kind of useless as is. He might as well start using that extra zombie body to start tapping it and getting some Crypt Breaker value. You can see that Calcano is largely out of gas otherwise, with just 1 Fatal Push in hand.
Rogue Refiner coming from Martin Müller. In as much as he's not actually put anything substantial on the board just yet, this is actually kind of his game going to plan. He's getting to just sort of keep things moving, protect his life total, generate energy incidentally, while also making sure that he has cards in hand for his mid to late game.
Calcano picks up a Diregraph Colossus this turn. Going to see him draw a card off the Crypt Breaker first.
Now, these points of life really don't matter too much in the ultimate scheme of things. Once Martin Müller ends up attacking, he attacks for so much that Calcano will be happy to trade in a life point here, a life point there, in order to improve the quality of his hand.
Yeah, Calcano's life total doesn't matter much at all in this. You're absolutely right, Tim.
Martin Müller not missing any land drops, which is part of the plan, because he does already have Chandra Flamecaller in hand. And one difference between his deck and that of Yuuya Watanabe's is that he has copies of Servant of the Conduit in his deck, and if we look at his hand, we can see that he actually has some of them to work with here. They help accelerate him to some of his key threats, they add to his energy, and they mean that he can be a little bit more aggressive about simply casting some of the threats that might otherwise be marveled into.
Now we'll see Martin add at least one, if not two, Servants of the Conduit this turn. If he decides only to play one, Calcano will probably go ahead and Fatal Push it. And we're reaching a key break point here on Martin Müller's mana. You can see he has 5 lands on the battlefield. The Servant of the Conduit would have meant the 6th mana there. I think Calcano is going ahead with a Fatal Push there, you know, both to remove a creature, but also to try to prevent Martin Müller from hitting 6 lands next turn, which is the key amount that he needs to cast Chandra Flamecaller. Now, we know from seeing Martin Müller's hand that he does actually have a 6th untapped land, a forest in hand, so he will be able to play Chandra next turn. And that's going to be bad news for Calcano.
Yeah, all of Chandra's abilities very live in this matchup. There are some cases where perhaps getting rid of creatures on the board, not a big deal. But right here, it's exactly what Mueller needs to sort of stabilize and get through to the late game. Can't imagine that he's going to be making too many hasty elementals apart from mainly to tick up loyalty, but it is a reasonable clock that will close out games.
So Calcano wisely just choosing to draw cards each turn with the Crypt Breaker. And he's actually holding back a little bit. You can see he hasn't played Diregraph Colossus from his hand. I believe he actually picked up a second copy of that. He does go ahead and play the Relentless Dead because that, of course, can come back to his hand if Martin Müller is able to play Chandra and sweep the board. So really wise for Calcano to be playing around that Chandra and just keeping some gas in the tank.
Also keeping some lands untapped for the Relentless Dead, meaning that its various abilities are still live. As and when Relentless Dead dies, there are various methods of making sure that you get something out of the bargain, assuming you have mana to work with it. So immediately using Chandra Flameclaw's ability just for -1 there. Now talk us through why you might only do a small Chandra there.
So Martin Müller did -1 instead of -2 there. He really wants to take out the Crypt Breaker and stop that card drawing engine that Christian Calcano has, but he actually doesn't want to kill the Relentless Dead there. If he kills the Relentless Dead, then Calcano can use its Die's ability to actually return a creature from his graveyard to his hand and rebuild that much faster.
Okay, so Calcano having to consider what's the play for him here. If he can attack Chandra, he certainly will, and that's exactly what he goes for. Menace on that Relentless Dead, just one of the many, many lines of text on the powerful zombie. As you need 2 or more creatures to block it, and the Diregraph Colossus there coming down as a 4/4. It will mean more zombies incoming as and when any zombie spells cast from hand by Christian Calcano. The Colossus at some point is going to be pretty hefty here. One thing to be said for some other forms of removal that have been used against zombies, if you can exile them, very relevant, not just because some of them can come back, but for moments like this where Diregraph Colossus is just simply massive. Now, Chandra there using her 0 ability, Martin Müller discarding his hand, drawing that many cards +1, and I believe that he found himself an Aetherworks Marvel in the process.
So with 12 energy already, this is going to be a huge Aetherworks Marvel for Martin Müller. You know, I was thinking for a moment there that the advantage may have been shifting a little bit back toward Christian Calcano with the way that he chose to play around that impending Chandra Flamecaller. He did a really nice job with that, but with Chandra finding Aetherworks Marvel for Martin Müller, I think things are going to get pretty dicey here pretty quickly.
Calcano has been navigating this game well, but at the same time, I think that matchup-wise, he does have something of a disadvantage here.
certainly in the pre-sideboard games, I would agree. The difference between the mono black and the black white zombies deck is basically that the mono black zombies is more streamlined. It's going to more effectively curve out. It's not going to stumble with mana as much. It gets to play Relentless Dead more reliably, but it does lack access to things like Anguished Unmaking, which can be a little bit more give a little bit more interaction in a matchup like this.
So the first activation of Aetherworks Marvel coming from Martin Müller here, and finds a second Aetherworks Marvel. Now, talk us through how it works when you have two Marvels in play, albeit very briefly.
So, Aetherworks Marvel is legendary, so you can only have one on the battlefield at a time. You get your choice of which other one to sacrifice if there are two, so Martin goes ahead and sacrifices the one that was already used, and that's going to give him actually 2 energy, one from each of the Marvels that was briefly in play.
So the second use of Aetherworks Marvel in just the one turn finds yet another copy of Aetherworks Marvel, working his way through his deck with aplomb here, Martin Müller.
This is attacking me. This is attacking.
Is there another way to generate energy for the most spins that I've seen in a single turn in this tournament? It looks a little like it. Harness Lightning there, targeting the Relentless Dead.
Yeah, that resolves.
Christian Calcano has a lot of mana available, depending on whether or not Martin Müller chooses to actually kill the Relentless Dead in order to use some abilities here. Looks like he's...
So I'll pay 1 and bring back Crypt Breaker, and 1 to bring this back. All right.
So a couple of different abilities being used here. Let's run through them. When Relentless Dead died, Calcano paid black mana to return the Relentless Dead to his hand. He also paid 1 colorless mana, effectively, generic mana, to return Crypt Breaker into play.
Kill this? No, kill this. Oh, sorry, kill this. Okay, so...
And the next spin of the wheel, finding another copy of Harness Lightning in order to make sure that that Crypt Breaker only had a very brief sojourn back in the feature match area in play.
So, Martin Müller has now activated Aetherworks Marvel, I believe, 3 times, Tim, and has not seen Ulamog yet.
3 times this turn.
This turn, yes. But it's important to note that you're not shuffling your library each time you activate Aetherworks Marvel. You're putting the cards on the bottom. So that means that the remaining 25 or 30 cards that Martin hasn't seen contain all 3 of his Ulamogs. And so he's highly likely to see one in the next spin or 2.
There we see Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger, ender of games all weekend long. 10-10. In some respects, the least exciting bit of information on the card. Indestructible, exiles permanents when it comes into play, and eats libraries when it attacks. Relentless Dead coming down, generating an additional zombie thanks to that Digraph Colossus. Rogue Refiner generating still more energy for Martin Müller. And it's one striking feature of this Marvel deck is it can start the turn with 0 energy and very easily get its way up to 6 in order to make sure that the Aetherworks Marvel can be activated time and time again.
So here is yet another activation of Aetherworks Marvel. We can guess, perhaps, based on how long it's taking Martin to decide here, that he probably has not seen an Ulamog this time.
Yeah, apparently it was something of a feature of some of the testing teams that if you had an Eldrazi and didn't put it into play in the first 5 seconds after an Aetherworks Marvel, you just weren't allowed to.
Right, it's considered like, bad manners or whatever.
And the Dane just considering his options. Goes for another copy of Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot. The life game of Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot, not irrelevant. I mean, if you've played and activated a few of them, it effectively has sort of given your beatdown opponent 50% more work to do. And Christian Calcano looking on, knowing that he's facing an uphill battle here. So a couple of elementals from the plus ability of Chandra Flamecaller there, getting to a hit in. Calcano takes that hit.
And honestly, I think that's more about just ticking up Chandra's loyalty than actually getting in damage. I mean, in theory, Martin could end the game with some other forms of damage besides, Ulamog himself, but I think, mostly that's just kind of like Martin saying he doesn't want to discard his hand to or 0 and ticking up loyalty a little bit for better option to -X in the future.
So the menace creature, the one that chooses to attack in on Chandra here. That meaning that it's a relatively safe finisher for Chandra. 4 points of damage going through to Martin Müller. But for those Woodweaver's puzzle knots, he might be vaguely concerned about his life total here, but he's already gained 6. He has another virtual 6 life sat on the battlefield, waiting to do its thing. And looking at Müller's hand, we can see why it is that he didn't want to 0 Chandra. He's at a point where he can reasonably start thinking about casting that Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger if he can just get a couple more lands in play. So Metallic Mimic. And it looks like we got some follow-up here. Potentially that second Digraph Colossus.
Yeah, I think at this stage in the game, Calcano's best plan is just to go all in, just, play everything he has, hope that Martin just has a blank in his hand, hope he misses one more time off the Marvel, and that he can just attack for a whole bunch of damage.
And when we say a whole bunch, we've got 2 coming from the first Relentless Dead, 4 is 6, 8, 11. We've got so much damage coming through. He has put Martin Müller in kind of a virtual check position here. Another activation, and it's not a quick Ulamog being put on the battlefield.
This is surprisingly unlucky here for Martin in terms of his Aetherworks Marvel spins. This is now, I believe, the 5th look at 6 cards.
And talking to some players, this is the exact situation that has put them off playing this deck in events that sort of, if you can't handle the swings of spinning the wheel, then that can be a tricky one. Mueller Virtuoso coming down. In effect, quite a lot of blockers available for Martin Müller here if he chooses to use his Woodweaver's Puzzle Knots in order to generate Thopters rather than simply making sure that he can continue to use Aetherworks Marvel. But with each swing and a miss with the Marvel, you're even more incentivized to go for it again because you know that your odds of hitting are that much higher.
So that's interesting. Starting Martin's turn there, I still would have had him as the considerable favorite, but having missed yet again with the Aetherworks Marvel, still off the amount of mana he needs to cast Ulamog from hand, that's going to give Christian Calcano the opportunity to make one more huge attack here. Now, there is a Whirler Virtuoso and a Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot, so Martin has a little bit of flexibility in terms of gaining some life and maybe making a chump blocker or 2, but that's still a lot of damage coming in. So this is kind of going to be like one more spin or bust here for Martin Müller.
And with 2 copies of Digraph Colossus in play, it does mean also that every zombie that gets cast by Christian Calcano this turn is effectively 3 creatures. He's not going to have any trouble putting together a sizable board, and with Westvale Abbey in play, he's got the potential, if he can get Martin Müller low, to be able to fly over and get everything going. And this is where his spot removal may look interesting, because if he can kill off the Whirler Virtuoso early, then that really constrains Martin Müller's plans in terms of how many flying blockers he can make for a Profane Prince.
So looking at Calcano's hand, he actually has up to 3 zombies he can cast this turn. As you said, Tim, each one of those is going to make 2 more tokens from the Digraph Colossus pair that Calcano has. And what this means is Calcano can actually just go so wide that even if Martin Müller hits Ulamog next turn, it's not going to be enough. He's not going to be able to remove enough zombies or block enough zombies to make a difference here. So we're actually seeing things moving in favor of Christian Calcano, which honestly really surprises me based on the way that this game shaped up in the early turns here. And that has a lot to do with just sort of the luck that Martin Müller had in terms of his Aetherworks Marvel spins.
The judge there just checking why the Crypt Breaker does not have a +1/+1 counter on it from the Metallic Mimic. Calcano was quick to put counters on the zombies that came into play from Digraph Colossus.
is Hunter. Oh, yeah, that's true. Oh, yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, my bad. Thank you. Okay, so please both pay.
Easy to get excited when there's so many things going on and you're in your first Pro Tour top 8. But the judges just making sure that everything progresses as it should. Calcano more concerned with drawing the extra card than having a 2-2 Crypt Breaker. That is one that he's unlikely to send into the red zone and risk losing.
Yeah, although I'm actually somewhat surprised that Calcano is just going for another draw here with the Crypt Breaker. I mean, it seems like if he just starts attacking with everything he can every turn, he can put Martin in a spot where Ulamog is just not enough. You know, it can take out 2 zombies and threaten to block 1 more, but...
Crikey, Lord of the Accursed, a powerful pickup there, though. He gets to cast that rather than any of the other zombies he already had in hand. Everything's coming in with the +1/+1 counter, and being able to give his team menace means that even if Martin Müller tries to go wide with spending energy on Thopter tokens, he may just not be able to go wide enough.
Yeah, and more importantly, it's also boosting the toughness of all the zombies as well. I think we're at a point where Ulamog is not enough for Martin regardless, and Chandra Flamecaller might be the next card that he's looking for, just to try to sweep the board and buy enough breathing room to then hit an Ulamog after that. But with the Lord of the Accursed there and all those +1/+1 counters and the huge Diagraph Colossuses, you know, even a Chandra Flamecaller at this point is not going to be enough to totally clear out the board.
Yeah, each of the relatively boring zombie tokens are 4/4s. That Diagraph Colossus is a 6/6 coming in here. So 2 creatures coming in, but representing 10 damage.
So Martin, looking at his Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot and his Whirler Virtuoso, you know, thinking about how he wants to spend his energy here carefully. Makes 1 Thopter, goes ahead and blocks both zombies, saving a bit of energy.
Now, by my count, there are 3 copies of Chandra left for Martin Müller to find here.
Yeah, although we don't know, he may have put some on the bottom, or he may know some are already on the bottom from his previous Aetherworks Marvel spins. And here we go.
There is an Ulamog.
Unfortunately, I think Ulamog is just not even an option here for Martin Müller. I'm frankly not even sure what is an option. It doesn't seem to me like anything that he could hit here, you know, between his draw step and Aetherworks Marvel is really going to get the job done. I mean, if you could have some combination of being able to cast an Ulamog and also finding a Chandra Flamecaller or vice versa, that might be enough. You know, for example, if Ulamog can take out the Lord of the Accursed and maybe one of the Diagraph Colossuses, and then Chandra can come down and sweep away the rest of the board. But it's definitely going to take a combination of cards here for Martin Müller. So we'll see what he can come up with.
It's a sad Eldrazi Titan. It's big, but it may not be big enough here. So it will be cast, so there's 2 permanents going to get exiled here. Martin Müller trying to figure out what the best he can do is here. Lord of the Accursed and one of those 2 copies of Diagraph Colossus.
22.
And Martin Müller, he's been gaining a lot of life off these Woodweaver's Puzzle Knots, but he's facing down just a crazy amount of damage here. Each of the zombie tokens is a 3/3. Calcano forming some sort of elaborate pattern with his zombies, wants to make sure they each have their own space to work with. Westvale Abbey, potentially an option here. It does mean that he's able to get flying damage in, and the shields are down in terms of an Aetherworks Marvel activation, so it's simply a matter of Martin Müller's on 22. He can go to 25 with Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot. Can Calcano get in all of that damage in a gigantic attack here? Tapping mana here for Calcano. Looks like he's decided that Westvale Abbey is not going to be the direction he's going in. And And in fact, I think that he's just 1 mana short on being able to get to the Profane Prince. But he does still have the option, I guess, of tapping some zombies to draw cards to try and find land. Dread Wanderer bringing a buddy. They both get a +1/+1 counter.
Combat.
Huge attack here.
One of
coming
those
in from
zombies, I think,
Christian
was the one that
Calcano.
just came into play. We're just going to make sure that that attack is accurate. There we go.
So it's tapped but not attacking.
Just the 9 creatures hitting the red zone here.
So yeah, all these are going to attack.
One has Menace, that being the Relentless Dead. Lumbering Falls being activated by Martin Müller, so he's got a couple of blockers here.
Looks like 25 points total, I think, by my count. So definitely going to have to be some blocking going on here from Martin Müller.
Of course, it's not a feature that we trumpet about too much, but Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger is a fantastic blocker. 10/10 indestructible, can jump in the way of pretty much anything. And Lumbering Falls with its hexproof is also a safe one to get in the way of something.
19, right?
Yeah, looks like 19 damage coming through here.
+4, that's 19, right?
So that'll drop Martin down to 3.
Okay, yeah.
Trouble here for Calcano is he's at 11, and Ulamog and Lumbering Falls are both available.
So this died and this died.
So we're going to have to see something here as a blocker coming down post-combat.
Let's take a look at what Calcano has in his hand here. Looks like he's got a Relentless Dead that can come down.
Dread Wanderer, of course, coming into play tapped, so that one not a great blocker.
And also the zombies from Diregraph Colossus enter the battlefield tapped as well. Well, the Diregraph Colossus actually just died at the Ulamog anyway, so that's irrelevant. But so Calcano actually just sitting on this Relentless Dead, relying on it here to actually be able to block. Otherwise, Martin Müller would have lethal here. Let's see what Martin can come up with.
Big draw step for the Dane here. He's got lots of energy. Activates.
I actually think
Etherworks Marvel.
Chandra Flamecaller might be lethal here.
Finds a Chandra.
Let's think this through now. So Chandra could either -3 and then Lumbering Falls could be activated. Both could attack, and I think that's lethal on Calcano. He does have a fatal push, but that's not going to work against either the Ulamog or the Lumbering Falls. The other option Martin could go for is to plus Chandra, but then Ulamog is blocked by Relentless Dead, so that's considerably worse. So I think we're going to go with a minus on Chandra here.
Well, there'll be 2 Relentless Deads dying, and there's 2
very
mana
true, yes.
available with some creatures in the graveyard.
And those do come back to the battlefield, and they do come back untapped. So that's going to allow for some more blockers.
The big issue for Calcano here, of course, is that even if Martin Müller isn't able to kill him this turn, he would still be able to say, you know what, you don't have an attack force anymore.
And Calcano actually pretty constrained on mana here as well. He can either, say bring back 1 Relentless Dead to his hand and bring back a 1-mana zombie like a Crypt Breaker to chump block with, or he could bring back 2 1-mana zombies, one of which is going to have to chump block the Ulamog. So this is actually putting Calcano in a pretty big pinch here. I think he probably wants to bring back 1 Relentless Dead to his hand and 1 chump blocker to the battlefield, 1 Crypt Breaker, for example.
Looks like he's gone with that line. So 20 cards getting exiled on this, the first Ulamog attack that we've seen on camera in this matchup. And in fact, the first one we've seen in this top 8 thus far, because didn't actually need it, Yuuya Watanabe.
So things swinging back very much in favor of Martin Müller here. That was a tricky turn sequence, I mean, for Calcano to do all that math of attacking and how Martin's going to block, and then Yeah, that's going to do it, actually. Calcano failing to come up with anything.
Into the first sideboarded game, Martin Müller already 2 games up. He just needs to find one more win to be able to get things going. But we have one more game pre-sideboarded that we're going to show you before we get on to that, and that is between Chris Fennell and Yuya Watanabe. They've been patiently waiting to get their second game in for a little bit of time now. Again, it's going to be Chris Fennell on the play. He lost the first game, and as #1 seed, he was always going to be on the play in game 1. We'll get a chance to see whether or not his black-white zombies deck can put the zombies on the board in this top 8. There you can see the stats on Chris Fennell. He had 1 Pro Tour top 8 prior to this. That was Pro Tour Born of the Gods, where he was playing Storm. Quite a different style of deck that he's on here, but given that he's best known for his drafting ability, I think that a deck that's attacking and blocking is probably one that's right up his alley.
Yeah, certainly seems to have been the case based on his Swiss performance, going 9-1 in the Swiss portion of this tournament with his white-black zombies deck. Just a fantastic performance. And from what I hear, honestly, Chris Fennell said he didn't put a lot of work into playtesting standard, mostly just trusted his team for the list and kind of picked things up as it went, and that worked out really well for him.
Now, looking at Chris Fennell's hand, what does that say to you about how he characterizes this matchup? He kept a hand of 5 lands, Crypt Breaker, and Anguished Unmaking.
I think it really shows how much weight he puts on Anguished Unmaking in this particular matchup. Again, it's just something that's come up over and over for him throughout the tournament, how powerful that card is, how powerful it is to be able to interact on that axis against an Aetherworks Marvel deck, and being willing even to keep a 5-land opening hand with not much pressure.
I guess that Crypt Breaker in and of itself does give you good things to do with those lands. We've not talked so much about the ability to pay 1 on a black, discard cards, and make 2/2 zombies, but it is another option for Crypt Breaker. There comes an Aether Hub, getting the first energy for Yuya Watanabe. Last game we saw Censor being a big deal about stopping early plays. If Chris Fennell wants here, he can kind of play around that just by using Crypt Breaker to make zombies and be tapping out for abilities rather than spells for a little while.
That's right. Of all the 1-creature hands that you could hope to keep, Crypt Breaker is definitely the creature you want to see now. Now the problem is Chris Fennell really needs to dodge a Harness Lightning from Yuya Watanabe. Crypt Breaker is the only pressure he has right now. He's going to want to use that to discard cards and make zombies, but if Harness Lightning takes out Crypt Breaker, that could potentially leave Chris Fennell without any pressure for quite some time.
Yeah, Watanabe having to use his energy to cast Harness Lightning on Crypt Breaker. Gets obviously some of it back, but every point of energy is valuable to him. More lands the pick up here for Chris Fennell. While obviously he wants to have answers, ideally he wants to have a couple of threats there too, just to make sure that Watanabe feels under some kind of pressure here. Just the 1 zombie hitting the red zone there, taking Watanabe down to 18.
Taking a look at Fennell's hand, looks like he's picked up a Liliana's Mastery since last we checked, which is good. It's going to give him some late game power, but he'd much rather be seeing like a 2-drop or a 3-drop, something that can just get on board right away. Still sitting on that Anguished Unmaking, but that's not a card that's going to be relevant, for quite some time here.
Yeah, there are some very clear targets for Chris Fennell when it comes to that premium removal spell.
And the problem with putting a lot of weight on having an Anguished Unmaking hand is that you still need the pressure to get on board first and put your opponent on the back foot, and then use the Anguished Unmaking to kind of keep them off balance. But I think a slow hand with just Anguished Unmaking might be giving Yuya too much time to develop and just breathing room to do things like cast Glimmer of Genius and use his Harness Lightnings to pick off key creatures along the way. And the longer this game goes on, the more it's going to favor Yuya in general, so long as Chris Fennell can't get a lot of traction on board. Now, it does pick up with Diagraph Colossus, which is a decent addition there.
It will mean that every subsequent zombie drawn by Chris Fennell does serve well to widen this board. So I like the pickup there, and I'm not surprised at all to see Watanabe firing off another copy of Harness Lightning to kill it. Ultimately puts him down on energy because he had to use the full 3 energy generated by Harness Lightning to kill the Colossus, and spent 1 on that Aether Hub. Currently doesn't have any other sources of red mana. So a waiting game kind of favoring Watanabe here. Chris Fernell picks up Lord of the Accursed, so he's got an option here. He can either play a land, go for his Liliana's Mastery and potentially risk a Censor, or, as we've seen him do, go for the Lord of the Accursed that is just a little bit harder for Watanabe to answer.
Yeah, actually, interestingly, he did have a land in hand last turn. He opted not to play his Shambling Vent last turn, which indicates that he is playing around Censor. So not only does he not have the option of casting Liliana's Mastery this turn because his land enters tapped, but also I think he's clearly made an effort to play around Censor so far, and probably will wait for his 6th land if he can to go ahead and play that Liliana's Mastery.
Of course, Liliana's Mastery and Lord of the Accursed doing a great tandem job to pump all of the zombie tokens quite a bit. Liliana's Mastery effectively being a 1-card team with which to take down Yuya Watanabe's life total. Currently on 13, so he's taken a lump, but is not looking in too terrible shape just yet. It certainly could be worse for the Japanese Hall of Famer.
Getting a glimpse at Yuya Watanabe's hand looks pretty good to me. He's got 2 copies of Harness Lightning for key creatures and also 2 copies of the namesake Aetherworks Marvel.
Now, the Dissenter's Deliverance that we just saw cycled there by Watanabe, yes, it doesn't do a great deal in this matchup. Apart from it does draw you into more cards and effectively thinning a deck where you're not typically too constrained on mana for a lot of the games means that at least having an artifact removal spell costs him very little indeed in this matchup. Fennell has picked up a Dark Salvation this turn, so he's now got a question in his mind of, does he want to risk a Censor here by playing a 5-drop?
Yeah, it's a pretty tough decision. He's got to choose between being able to continue applying pressure or just taking an entire turn off. His other option here, looking at his hand, would be to cast a Dark Salvation. If he wants to play around Censor, though, he has to cast Dark Salvation for X=1, which is also a pretty ineffective play. So does decide to go with the Liliana's Mastery, decides he can't afford to play around Censor, and does indeed get censored. So not a happy moment there for Chris Fennell, but at least he gets to get a couple damage in with a zombie token. Harness Lightning takes out Lord of the Accursed, and we're left with just a single zombie token on Chris Fennell's side of the battlefield. Yuya at 11 life, which is still pretty comfortable.
1 Harness Lightning left in Yuya Watanabe's deck, and that is, in fact, in his hand. So this is problem town for Chris Fernell here, not able to mount a particularly solid offense in this early game, and pretty soon we're going to see Yuya Watanabe's deck doing what it does best in the mid to late game, which is powering out huge threats. Rogue Refiner there, draws a card, generates a couple more energy. And Lumbering Falls the play in terms of land.
And you can see Yuya has been sitting on 2 copies of Aetherworks Marvel for quite some time now, opting not to run them out until he has enough energy there. 2 reasons for that. I think he just wants to continue spending his mana effectively, either getting on board, getting blockers in play, or killing creatures, or drawing more cards with Glimmer of Genius. And also, I'm sure he's thinking about the presence of Anguished Unmaking in Chris Fennell's hand. He knows that Chris kept a hand that was really light on pressure, that didn't curve out well, and so I think there's a really good chance in Yuya's mind that Chris Fennell has Anguished Unmaking. Indeed, that is true. And so not wanting to expose Aetherworks Marvel, that makes a lot of sense. So here comes Dark Salvation. Looks like X=2, so this will make 2 more zombies and take out that Rogue Refiner. We can see Chris Fennell has abandoned the idea of playing around Censor. He did get censored last turn anyway, so he might be thinking that Yuya probably doesn't have a 2nd copy. And he is correct. Here come those 2 more zombies. Take out the Rogue Refiner. Zombie gets in for 2 damage, knocking Yuya down to 9 life.
Now, on 9 life, with 3 zombies in play, any mass pump effect, any Lord as we call them, would be enough to threaten lethal here. So Yuya Watanabe has to at least have a little pause to make sure that he can find a way of staying safe in the next turn. Another Aetherworks Marvel to pick up. So sometimes we talk about the Aetherworks Marvel deck getting flooded on Ulamog. Having Ulamog in hand typically pretty much the last place that you want it most of the time. But drawing multiple Aetherworks Marvels doesn't do much for you. You can generate a little bit of extra energy, as we've seen Martin Müller do in this quarterfinals already, but those draws relatively low impact.
So one option here for Yuya is just to play one of his Aetherworks Marvels and cast Harness Lightning, actually just gaining 3 energy, not killing any creatures, and that'll give him enough energy to go ahead and activate the Aetherworks Marvel. The risky part about that plan is it really, really revolves around hitting Ulamog right away off of that Marvel, and if Yuya misses, his shields are going to be down. He's going to take 6 damage from those zombies, And that might put him in a position where, you know, he can't generate enough energy quickly enough or find an Ulamog in time to actually stabilize against the board. But it may be his best play here. It's, yeah, really tough to say.
There does come the Aetherworks Marvel, and it looks like he's going a little bit aggressive here, casting the last of his Harness Lightnings, going up to 6 energy, and the shield's fully down at the moment that Yuuya Watanabe chooses to activate the Marvel. He waits on it, though, at least for now, to see what's coming from Chris Fennell.
And this is where that Anguished Unmaking is likely to pay off here. So even if Yuya does hit an Ulamog, he could, for example, remove 2 zombies, but then Chris Fennell will counter with Anguished Unmaking, taking out the Ulamog. And from there, Yuya really doesn't have a lot left going on. You know, he'd have to top deck, I think, Glimmer of Genius would be what he'd be hoping for at that point. So things are actually starting to look pretty good in favor of Chris Fennell here. He's adding a couple more zombies to the battlefield. He's leaving up mana for Anguished Unmaking. Here come those zombies and a spin of the Aetherworks Marvel. Let's see what Yuya can hit. He really is looking for Ulamog here, and even then, I'm not sure it's going to be enough.
Each card is a sweat here, and he's being checked out very, very carefully here by Yuuya Watanabe. He knows how much trouble he's in.
There's an Ulamog. So he's found what he wants here, but is it going to be enough? Ulamog comes down and can take out 2 of those attacking zombie tokens. Also has the option to take out, say, the Crypt Breaker and one of the attacking zombies. That might be the better option here. Either way, I think we're going to see Anguished Unmaking come down on Ulamog. So 2 zombies being exiled. Anguished Unmaking hits the Ulamog. 1 more zombie cracks in for 2 points, knocking Yuya down to 7. And it's looking like Chris Fennell is in pretty good shape from this point. Now, it's all going to come down to what Yuya can top deck over this next 1 or maybe 2 turns.
Now, thinking about the sequencing of Chris Fennell on that last turn, he played his Crypt Breaker and Dread Wanderer before attacking. Do you think that that might have been to present Yuuya Watanabe with the option to potentially choose worse things to remove?
It's possible. I mean, the other option might be, you know, he's thinking about maybe baiting Yuya into marveling early and trying to, you know, hit a Torrential Gear Hulk into... Yeah, I'm really not sure. But in any case, it's all coming down to what Yuya drew this turn.
Well, it looks like he has a lot of Marvels and an Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger in hand.
Jesus, 4 Harness Lightnings, 15 cards.
I mean, in a way, Chris, at least you don't need to worry about those Harness Lightnings anymore. Just the 1 Torrential Gear Hulk to potentially mean a 5th.
So rough spot here for Yuya. 3 dead cards in hand. We see Yuya passing back the turn. I think his only big hope here is that Chris Fennell doesn't go for a lethal attack. I think he has Shambling Vents here, which will make it 7.
16.
And Chris Fennell actually opts just to draw a card instead. So Yuya's little... Oh, okay, I see. Yuya has Lumbering Falls back on defense, so there wouldn't have been a possibility of a lethal attack there. Chris Fennell could have chipped in for some damage and just knocked Yuya's life total low, but that's really dangerous in the face of something like a Torrential Gear Hulk or, you know, just activating and blocking with Lumbering Falls.
Yeah, a little bit of multi-time Player of the Year equity in terms of passing with mana up and cards in hand as well, potentially.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that even when you know you're in a really bad spot, or even in a situation where you're dead on board, your opponent doesn't necessarily do that, or know that rather. And if you just pass back with confidence and act as though you have, you know, some kind of trick, sometimes you can get your opponent to instead just take a more conservative line. But here comes a really big draw for Yuuya Watanabe. Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot off the top. That's 6 energy all by itself. And you know what, Tim? That's enough to activate Aetherworks Marvel 1 more time. We could find another Ulamog off of that. There's 2 accounted for so far. 1 has already been exiled. 1 is stranded in Yuya's hand. But there are 2 more in his library that could be found by this Aetherworks Marvel.
I think there's actually only 1 more in the list for Yuuya Watanabe. Just 3 copies of Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger, in this Musashi list. And it's going to be 7 energy in total off that Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot because, of course, the Aetherworks Marvel generating an energy when the Puzzle Knot goes to the graveyard. One way or another, I think that Yuuya Watanabe is going to have to be figuring out what his best time to spin is here. If he's activating it sooner, that means that at least Chris Fernell is getting information to work with, and so he chooses to pass things back, make the most of the fact that it can be done at instant speed.
This looks like an up... Is this an upkeep activation here?
Now, Watanabe does not have the mana up to be able to activate his Lumbering Falls here, but is showing 2 mana up, which does threaten a few different spells that Chris Fennell will be considering here. $13 life making a big difference in a lot of those decisions there, because Chris Fernell is going to struggle to deal that amount of damage in a single turn. The power of Crypt Breaker being shown there. Drawing additional cards. Perennial favorite of Magic players everywhere, and looks like it was not just for nothing. We got a small attack here coming from Shambling Vent. Aetherworks Marvel. 6 cards. We know there's 1 Ulamog to find. Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot the choice here, and I kind of like it. Just consistently generating energy, gaining life, meaning that Chris Fennell, even though he felt like he was close on the beatdown plan relatively recently, he's got a lot of work to do now in terms of taking Watanabe's life total down to 0. And that Aetherworks Marvel likely to be spun again.
Yeah, as long as Yuya can keep treading water here in terms of his life total and his energy production, he can just keep taking spins at that Aetherworks Marvel. And, you know, his game plan from here is just to find that 1 more Ulamog left in his library. It's that or nothing else really can help him from this point. And he's got to find it soon, because Chris Fennell is, you know, drawing multiple cards per turn off that Crypt Breaker. If he finds another Anguished Unmaking, that's going to be an answer, you know, to that remaining Ulamog. The other possibility is if Yuya can just kind of stall things out long enough, maybe with a Torrential Gear Hulk, he might be able to unlock enough mana that he can cast that Ulamog from his hand. But, you know, that's several turns away at this point, and, you know, Chris Fennell is bearing down on him pretty hard.
It's a strange kind of a race here when you're quote-unquote aggro deck is taking turns off to draw additional cards, but there's a lot of security that Chris Fennell gets by doing that. He's getting to leave up the exact Anguished Unmaking mana. Now we know that there, and indeed Yuya will of course know as well, that pre-board 2 copies of Anguished Unmaking, so at most 1 left to worry about. I'm not quite sure how much Yuya can be considering actually playing around that at this point though. Fatal Push being turned into a zombie there. Crypt Breaker having better things to do with that card than anything that Chris Fennell was going to achieve any other way. And we saw Christian Calcano able to go very, very wide indeed against Aetherworks Marvel. It looks like that might be where Chris Fennell is headed to. None of these are attacks, kids. That's another card being drawn by Chris Fennell. There is another zombie in hand for Fennell, so he can potentially be drawing another card this turn. Binding Mummy, the pickup. Now, Binding Mummy's interaction with Crypt Breaker, kind of an interesting one, because Crypt Breaker does let you make zombies at instant speed, and that means that sometimes you can use Binding Mummy defensively to tap down opposing creatures, such as, for example, an Ulamog.
Yeah, the tricky thing is, in order to get that going, Chris would need the Binding Mummy and or the Crypt Breaker on the battlefield after the Ulamog, because Ulamog's cast trigger can actually remove them before he's on the battlefield to be tapped in the first place. But it's definitely something that can come up depending on how the game plays out. So Yuya goes ahead and sacks that Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot, goes up to 8 energy down to 2. And here we go, another look. Still, again, looking for Ulamog. Other things that might help him here would be Glimmer of Genius, Torrential Gear Hulk. There's a Glimmer. I don't see an Ulamog.
Glimmer of Genius looks to be the choice here for the 2-time Player of the Year.
Yuya with 8 lands on the battlefield. If he sees a Shrine of the Forsaken Gods, that could get him up to 10 to be able to cast an Ulamog from his hand. So that may be something he's digging for as well.
And if we look at the way that this game has played out, Yuya did everything that his deck is trying to do. He got an Ulamog cast, and then one Anguished Unmaking from Chris Fennell has bought so many additional turns in this game.
Yeah, it really has. Really showcases the power of that card and the difference between the mono black and the white black zombies decks, at least pre-sideboard. Now, both the zombies decks will have a lot more interaction post-sideboard, so once we progress onto those games, we're going to see some extra tools available, but for now, definitely the all-star of this game has been that Anguished Unmaking for Chris Fennell.
Rogue Refiner means that 6 energy is where Yuya Watanabe is at. He gets an additional card in hand. Now, if that draw was another Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger, that would be kind of a disaster for him. It doesn't look like that's the case.
Here's another spin of the Aetherworks Marvel.
Kozilek's returned the choice there by the looks of things.
Oh, very nice.
Just the one copy of that in the main deck for Yuya Watanabe, but one is enough when your opponent's entire board has a toughness of 2 or less.
And that's actually a huge swing there. I like that Yuya went for that activation on his own main phase while the Crypt Breaker and all those zombies were tapped. That's going to deny Chris Fennell the ability to draw extra cards off the Crypt Breaker. And that Kozilek's return just perfect, 2 being the perfect amount of damage to take out all those zombies. And now things looking like they're swinging back in Yuya's favor here. He has 9 lands on the battlefield already, so that Ulamog in his hand is no longer stranded as it was before. 1 more untapped land, and Yuya has access to that. He also, again, still has that Aetherworks Marvel churning through his library with 1 more Ulamog lurking there. And now on top of it, he has Kozilek's Return in his graveyard, ready to come back for 5 damage to everything for another free sweep of Chris Fennell's board. So one option here is if Yuya is able to find Ulamog this turn, he can simply exile that Diregraph Colossus and one of those Dread Wanderers, and now he's going to have the advantage on board. The other option is if Yuya struggles for another turn or 2 to find his Ulamog or the ability to cast the one from his hand, then he's going to be able to use Kozilek's Return to just sweep away Chris Fennell's board again and exile anything that survives it. And either way, Yuya is going to be in pretty good shape as long as he can find an Ulamog within, I would say, the next 2 turns. And sure enough, there's an untapped island. I believe that is his 10th mana source. And here he comes.
Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger comes down. A couple of great targets here. Will not take long for the Ceaseless Hunger to end this game. Chris Fernell here, working off the top of his deck, and when you're having to deal with an Eldrazi Titan, you need to be knocking on that deck fairly hard.
This has been a nail-biter of a game here, Tim. I mean, I think the early game went from strongly Yuya favored into a mid-game that became strongly Chris Fennell favored, and now that Yuya was able to cast that Ulamog from his hand, things are squarely back in Yuya's favor, and it is going to be a tough road from here for Chris Fennell, and probably a short one as well.
That Ulamog. Yuya Watanabe there, just checking the number of cards in Chris Fennell's deck, trying to get a feel for how many attacks Ulamog will need to completely close out this game. I think that at this point, Watanabe would be quite keen to get through this game and press the advantage while he has it. Liliana's mastery meaning that Fennell has blockers, so his life total comparatively safe. The same cannot be said about the cards remaining in his library. Strictly speaking, would this be the Pro Tour that we've seen the most games end in decking?
That's a really interesting question. I'm sure there was some like Tolarian Academy Pro Tour back in like the early 2000s or something, but it's definitely the one in recent memory that has the most decking, I think.
I guess that technically there's a lot of concessions with nearly decking going on that possibly messes up that math, but each of the players looking through what's been exiled here to try and get a feel for what might still be to come in this game. Yuya's asking whether or not Fennell wants to block. Spoiler alert, he really does.
Sure, I'll take it.
And right on time, the one copy of Shrine of the Forsaken Gods that's in Yuuya Watanabe's deck. I like the addition of that card to the list. It means that the possibility of drawing your Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger is softened a little bit because it's that much more likely that you can reasonably expect to be able to cast it. It does tap for 2 mana if you are casting colorless spells, if you have 7 or more lands. And you know what? That's enough. Yuuya Watanabe picks up his 2nd game win. Both of these Teamer Aetherworks Marvels decks not having a completely smooth ride to pick up their first 2 game wins, but regardless of that, both able to go into these sideboarded games 2 games up, just looking for a single game win out of the next potential 3 games in order to advance to the semifinals. We're going to get a chance to jump across now and see the 3rd game between Christian Calcano and Martin Müller. Mueller on the right of our screen from Denmark is already 2 games up, and after sideboarding, how much does the shape of this particular game change?
I think it changes quite a bit. In the pre-sideboard games, Calcano's mono-black zombies has very few ways to actually interact with the Aetherworks Marvel game plan. It's basically just a glorified beatdown deck with a bunch of zombie lords in it. Post-sideboard, things change dramatically. Calcano has access to cards like Transgress the Mind, which can strip a converted mana cost 3 or greater card out of his opponent's hand. There's also things like Lost Legacy that could take out all of Mueller's Ulamogs. There's some additional flexible options in terms of bringing Scrap Heap Scroungers as resilient threats. You know, Liliana's Mastery to apply more pressure if he feels like that's the way to go. But mainly it's the Transgress the Minds and the Lost Legacies I think that Calcano gets to bring in, and those are potentially devastating cards in this matchup.
In the early game, Christian Calcano, though, is still about those early creatures. Try and put a little bit of pressure on the board. 2 copies of Crypt Breaker alongside a Dread Wanderer. No attacks into the Servant of the Conduit on the other side of the battlefield. Calcano content to draw additional cards because you know what he doesn't have yet is a 3rd land.
It can't block. It can't block, right? It can block, right?
Yeah, that can block.
Yeah. Just making sure.
The Dread Wanderer. It comes into the battlefield tapped, but it is able to block. I guess that when you're designing cards, creatures that can come back from the graveyard time and time again, you need to be a bit careful about them being able to block immediately in, because otherwise you could end up with a situation where just a regular aggro deck really struggles to ever be able to get past them.
Yeah, we generally don't like those recursive creatures just turning into something that can block every turn, effectively acting as an indestructible blocker. If they're attacking a bunch, dying, and then coming back from the graveyard, that's a much more healthy gameplay pattern.
So Lost Legacy was naming Chandra Flamecaller, and you know what? He had a big hit there because 2 copies of Chandra Flamecaller in hand for Martin Müller, and with those 2 copies of Servant of the Conduit, the very next turn Chandra could have come down. This is exactly the way he drew it up.
Now, keep in mind, unlike other cranial extraction variants, as we call them, if you do hit a copy of the card in the player's hand with Lost Legacy, they get to draw a card to replace it, and that's sort of to counterbalance its cheaper mana cost as compared to, say, a 4-mana cranial extraction.
Makes sense to me. So there will be some consolation prizes for Martin Müller as he loses access to his powerful 6-mana Planeswalker. So if Christian Calcano had kind of drawn up how he wanted this game to play out, thus far I think that it's a pretty straightforward, good position for him. Obviously, still work to do, but we will see whether or not he's able to convert his first win in this quarterfinal of Pro Tour Amonkhet.
Yep.
Rogue Refiner coming down there now. One thing that Martin Müller does not need to worry about is energy already up to 8, and it seems like this Genesis list able to generate energy consistently time and again. Aether Hub coming down here, making that 9. And Calcano drawing another card.
And this is yet again seeing the Zombies deck first try to assemble its card draw engine with Crypt Breaker and just generate a long-term advantage before, finally amassing a large enough army to attack and end the game in a couple turns. And that's especially important post-sideboard with access to cards like Lost Legacy and Transgress the Mind. And sure enough, there is Lost Legacy now taking Ulamog out of Martin Müller's library. And that's really going to strip Martin Müller's deck of win conditions here. I'm going to actually go ahead and check the deck lists, Tim, and see what else Martin Müller might be able to come up with in order to actually win this game from this point. Looks like he has Sphinx of the Final Word in his sideboard, though I can't imagine he's actually brought that in unless he's really anticipated those Lost Legacies. Maybe he brought in one copy.
He could be Tireless Trackering.
He could be Tireless Trackling, but that's a very, very uphill battle against the Zombies deck. I mean, any sort of attacking on the ground type game plan is going to be very weak to what Zombies is naturally good at. The other avenue to victory would be Whirler Virtuoso and just generating lots of energy. We did see this happen a couple times throughout the Swiss, where the Team Aetherworks Marvel deck just kind of played like a mid-range deck, assembling combination of Aetherworks Marvel, Tireless Tracker, and Whirler Virtuoso to kind of just play lands, generate clues, sacrifice the clues, generate energy from Aetherworks Marvel, draw more cards, and eventually translate that into a bunch of Thopters. But that is a lot more difficult of a path to victory than just cheating an Ulamog into play on turn 4, for example.
Yeah, Aetherworks Marvel now tapping and spending 6 energy almost by default for something that costs 2 to 4 mana, I think. There we see it putting into play another copy of Servant of the Conduit. So energy not a problem, big threats, a bit of a problem for Martin Müller at this point.
And especially given that Christian Calcano already has his card advantage engine online with those Crypt Breakers, I actually think Calcano is going to be drawing more cards per turn than Martin Müller and is going to be better equipped to kind of get on the board with blockers and big creatures faster.
And here we see the beatdown plan from Martin Müller. 2 Servant of the Conduit and Rogue Refiner getting stuck in.
17. Damage 13.
Calcano going to 13, losing one of his creatures, but Dread Wanderer potentially going to come back if it works out that Calcano ends up low in hand. Though right now, plenty of cards in hand. I can't help but think that drawing at least one card is going to be straightforward for Christian Calcano here.
Calcano sitting on a pretty threat-dense hand here. He's actually a little bit constrained on mana, a little awkward here. He'd love to cast Liliana's Mastery or cast a 2-drop Metallic Mimic plus one of his lords, Digraph Colossus or Lord of the Accursed. Doesn't have a 5th land, I don't think, though, so he's going to have to make some choices about how he wants to spend his mana here. Looks like he's going with the Metallic Mimic, I think, first.
This means that if he draws into a land, he can still cast one of those 2 other powerful 3-mana zombies.
Right. Now, remember, Metallic Mimic actually gets to assume the creature type that you choose as well, so it is a zombie now. So if you wanted to, you could tap that toward the Crypt Breaker activation, but instead he's going to go ahead and just use the second ability, or rather, sorry,
the first ability.
The first ability, yeah, I don't know which order they're in, but the mana spending ability to discard a card and actually make a zombie there, and then now he still has 3 zombies up that he can tap to draw a card with Crypt Breaker.
Additionally, having a 3/3 zombie in play means that if Martin Müller wants to be attacking with Servant of the Conduit, it's not going to go quite so well for him. There is Lumbering Falls lurking in the land zone there for Martin Müller, though, so that may also get involved in this fight, because Müller has a lot of lands in hand here. An attack for 9 coming across the table here.
And Martin doing well to attack Christian Calcano's life total here. I mean, he's wisely figured out that that's his best path to victory, is just putting Calcano under a ton of pressure. Now, remember, Calcano has lost some life to activating his own Crypt Breaker. He's been spending some time kind of drawing more cards and casting spells that don't impact the board like Lost Legacy, and that kind of opens a small window, not a large one, but a small window for Martin Müller to actually put him under some life total pressure here.
Yeah, the 19-year-old Mueller, unfazed, it would seem, by the removal of most of the key threats from his deck, very, very quickly transitioning into this alternate game plan.
Yeah, I mean, likely he's not happy about the state of things right now, but at least it gives him a very clear, path for what he needs to do now. It's basically just, he's not going to win a long game. He's not going to find anything super powerful out of his deck. He's just got to work with the resources he has and just try to put Christian Calcano under life total pressure.
Well, a Virtuoso and a Rogue Refiner options, but Tireless Tracker is what he's going with. That's the one that can get biggest most easily, and you know what? With the amount of lands in hand that Martin Müller has, he's going to have a lot of clues to work with.
Calcano really looking to pick up a land here. Liliana's Mastery would really hit the spot in terms of adding 2 zombies to the battlefield, as well as pumping up all the zombies that he has. Looks like he found that untapped swamp there, so that's great. Imagine we will see the Liliana's Mastery this turn.
And this the turn where getting through that Tireless Tracker might be reasonable. Martin Müller on 18, though, so it's going to be a little bit of a struggle to kill him off particularly quickly. And with 7 life, it may be that Calcano decides that he's going to play defense and use that life to draw cards rather than giving it away through trying to get in a straightforward race just yet.
Now, the one thing Calcano's got to be careful of is if he does sit around drawing cards for several more turns, if Martin Müller is able to find a Whirler Virtuoso and generate a little bit more energy, those Thopters are going to be really hard for Calcano to deal with. The Zombies deck cannot block flyers effectively, and it's definitely not a great way to deal with the Thopters by spending 1-for-1 removal spells like Fatal Push or Grasp of Darkness on them. So Calcano's going to have to strike a careful balance here of taking 1 or 2 more turns to develop his board, but then actually flipping the script and putting pressure back on Martin Müller and trying to end the game before Müller can find Whirler Virtuoso.
The first clue sacrifice for Martin Müller, drawing a card, putting a counter on Tireless Tracker, generating an energy. Second verse, same as the first there, playing a land using that clue immediately.
Yep. Go.
All right, well, Müller's attacking held up, at least for now.
6.
All right, Calcano has lands to work with. We know he's got spells in hand.
And let's take a look at those spells. He's got Diagraph Colossus and Lord of the Accursed. Great options there. I think he's going to opt to just put as much pressure on as he can rather than taking a break to cast Transgress the Mind.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the width of that board now, being able to give all of his zombies menace, a bit of a problem for Martin Müller. Doesn't have that many creatures to block. At the moment, he would be able to block 2 creatures, and that would involve activating a Lumbering Falls if he's going to have to deal with a lot of menace.
So all Calcano has to do now is kind of just do the math, attack with a moderate number of creatures here, make sure he leaves enough blockers back that he's not taking too much damage back on a counterattack. 3 looks like a good number of zombies to send in here. That leaves him with 4 blockers. This will force Martin Müller to choose between trading off some creatures, chump blocking with some creatures, or just taking a bunch of damage. And if he goes for the latter, then Lord of the Accursed threatens to give Calcano's team menace the following turn, and that's certainly going to pose a lethal threat if Martin Müller dips much lower on life total.
Yeah, I mean, even those vanilla zombie tokens are 3/3s, so blocking options here for Martin Müller if he wants to kill off any of Christian Calcano's creatures aren't great.
Now, the other thing going on here is for each permanent that dies on Martin Müller's side of the battlefield, he is going to gain energy from that Aetherworks Marvel. Again, I think his best hope is to find Whirler Virtuoso, so he kind of wants to do a dance between trading off a couple creatures, protecting his life total a little bit, getting a little bit more energy, and then hoping to find Virtuoso, maybe being able to make a couple Thopters, chump block for another round or so. But honestly, Tim, I think the math just doesn't quite add up here. I think Calcano's battlefield is just too formidable at this
Martin
point.
Müller did just cycle his way into a Harness Lightning. And Harness Lightning being able to take down Lord of the Cursed definitely blunts the offense of Christian Calcano. Even after that, though, there are an awful lot of zombies on this board. It's not going to be an easy road to hoe here for Martin Müller.
Because even on the Virtuoso plan, he's going to be able to make maximum, I would say, 3 Thopters, which is still going to put him 2 turns away from attacking for the remaining 6 life points that Christian Calcano has.
Sweltering Suns.
Oh, that's
one of the
a
options.
really big pickup. Okay.
Exactly big enough to kill off Lord of the Accursed, and that in turn means that even the larger zombies are going to be in a bit of trouble here.
Okay, huge swing point here. It's also going to leave Tireless Tracker surviving through that.
Sorry, I missed the Linear's Master on top of screen. Clearly that's why we don't have more zombies hitting the bin here.
But in combination with the Harness Lightning, right?
Yes. Big pickup there for Martin Müller. 2 copies of Sweltering Suns in Martin Müller's deck, and it's one of those sweepers that 3 damage to each creature, sometimes not good enough against these zombie decks, but in combination with Harness Lightning, doing the trick. And actually, I believe another copy of Harness Lightning picked up here for Martin Müller. And Christian Calcano's board went from being gigantic to tiny, and 1 Tireless Tracker able to swing in, and Martin Müller, Team Genesis, gets the sweep on crowd favorite Christian Calcano. The 19-year-old Dane will be in our first semi-final, but we have some more magic to watch before we get there, of course. We get a chance to jump back and see a little bit more from Yuuya Watanabe and the guy that managed to finish top of the Swiss, that being Chris Fennell.
Wow, just amazing there, Tim, the end to that game. I mean, that was looking so favored for Christian Calcano there, and it's really that second copy of Harness Lightning able to take out the Diagraph Colossus afterwards that really made the difference there at the end.
So now we're on Black-White Zombies against the Japanese take on Team Aetherworks Marvel. Early Dread Wanderer from Chris Fernell. Concealed Courtyard, one of the cards enabling his White Splash. And the land base in this deck, straightforward enough that the splash feels kind of free. It's more just a kind of a different take on how he wants the deck to be able to play out, having Anguished Unmaking, having access to things like Declaration in Stone, Transgress the Mind, and another Anguished Unmaking in the sideboard means that after sideboarding, Chris Fernell's deck looking quite potent against these Aetherworks Marvel decks.
Yeah, the other small concession in adding white to the deck is you don't get to play Relentless Dead, because getting double black on turn 2 is a lot more difficult for this deck. But I definitely agree with you, Tim, that I like the black-white zombies. I like it. I like its matchup against Marvel pre-sideboard better than mono black, and I also like it post-sideboard better than mono black as well. It still gets to bring in those same types of cards like Transgress the Mind here. Chris Fennell has 4 copies in his sideboard, but he also gets an extra copy of Anguished Unmaking, as well as other options like Declaration in Stone. We've seen him bringing Gideon in these types of matchups throughout the Swiss, and so lots and lots of options here to kind of adapt his deck for the post-sideboard.
Wayward Servant coming down for Chris Fennell on turn 2. 2/2 for 2. That means that whenever another zombie enters the battlefield under your control, you get to drain your opponent for 1 point of life. We've seen these zombies decks can go very wide indeed. So there's certainly potential that Fernell might be able to sneak through extra points of damage that are not easily stoppable by blockers. Sensor dealing with Lord of the Accursed, another big sensor from Yuuya Watanabe. We saw them doing fantastic work for him in game 1. Still taking his hits, though, on just 14 life after 3 turns from Chris Fennell.
Yeah, pretty good start for Fennell, to be sure here. Yuya's hand also looking not too bad here. Had the sensor on turn 2, goes for an Attune with Ether. here on turn 3, finding his next land drop. And he's actually got some pretty good options in his hand there. He's got Sensor he can hold up again if Chris Fennell taps out for something powerful. He's also got a Shielded Ether Thief out of the sideboard, which is pretty good at blocking zombies and generating a little bit more energy. Into later on, he can Glimmer of Genius, but the thing I'm noticing about Yuya's hand is he's got no real way to catch up immediately. He doesn't have Aetherworks Marvel for a big play. He doesn't have any kind of sweeper in hand right now. He did bring in Radiant Flames off of the sideboard, presumably. So there are things he can find, but as it stands, you know, he's under quite a bit of pressure here from Chris Fennell.
Yeah, Yuya dropping to 9, I believe, after the drain from Wayward Servant, and another copy of Dread Wanderer means that Yuya Watanabe on 8, facing down 8 points of damage here. He's going to have to get something going very fast. Shielded Ether Thief can block something.
Well, it actually came out post-combat there, Tim, and the reason for that is Yuya was leaving up option to cast Censor. So that was an end-of-turn Shielded Ether Thief. So Yuya's life total under a lot of pressure here. Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot helps considerably with that, but Yuya's still going to be looking for a Marvel or a Sweeper very soon.
Yeah, Gideon in hand for Chris Fernell. We know that there's counter magic for that one if he even had the land to cast it. So Yuya on a virtual 14, that Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot, huge in terms of blunting the beatdown plan of Chris Fennell.
Now let's take a look at Fennell's hand. We can see he did bring in those Gideons out of the sideboard there, up to 4 copies, 2 in hand right now. He does have a Crypt Breaker as well he can add to the battlefield, but a little bit awkward again on mana. He doesn't have his 4th land to cast Gideon, and if all he has is Crypt Breaker this turn, then he's maybe leaving mana unspent, so not really optimizing the pressure he can put on Yuya. Goes for the Crypt Breaker, I think, pre-combat here. Again, it's always a decision about whether to stop and draw some more cards or whether to keep up the beatdown. In this position, I like Chris trying to get a draw out this turn, or drawing a card, rather, I should say.
Harness Lightning in response to that Crypt Breaker will mean that both the Wayward Servant won't get to trigger for it coming into play, and it won't be an option, of course, to be one of the creatures to tap to draw a card.
So Chris can either attack with all 3 Dread Wanderers, getting through 4 damage. One would be blocked by the Ether Thief, but I think it's just better to draw a card here. Try to hit his 4th land drop, try to dig for things like Transgress the Mind or Anguished Unmaking.
I think he found a Digraph Colossus there, which at some point later on may be fairly helpful. I mean, it's going to come down as a 4/4 for 3. There's already 2 zombies in the graveyard. I believe that Kozilek's Return, one of the pickups there for Yuya Watanabe.
That would be a really nice draw for him here. Yep, I see that Kozilek's Return indeed in the front of his hand there. So lots of options here for Yuya Watanabe. And remember, Yuya's been sitting on a copy of Censor here, and it's actually highly likely that Chris Fennell ends up playing into it. Kozilek's Return sweeping away Chris's board, and now Chris will, I think, either he'll draw a land here and probably go for a Gideon, or he won't, and he'll probably go for his Diregraph Colossus, and either way, that can be met with Censor from Yuya Watanabe. So potentially a huge tempo swing here for Yuya. Really like what that sweeper did for Yuya here, definitely giving him the advantage at this stage of the game. And there is the Censor taking out Diregraph Colossus with Fennell, yet again stuck on 3 lands.
The Digraph Colossus would have been gigantic with all of those zombies in the graveyard. As things stand, though, just more copies of Dread Wanderer for Chris Fennell. He is Dread Wanderer flooded, and sadly for him, at the expense of drawing additional lands.
Really cool seeing the work that Shielded Ether Thief is doing here. In some ways, it's almost a 1-for-1 removal spell on a zombie that actually gets to stick around and get kind of rebought in a way after a sweeper, because if you think of Shielded Ether Thief as holding off 1 zombie at a time, when the sweeper comes down, that zombie goes away, but the Shielded Ether Thief stays there to match up against the next zombie that comes down. So really like that sideboard addition there from Yuya. And of course, it allows him to translate energy into drawing more cards too, which is really, really useful.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely occasions where the Aetherworks Marvel deck is sufficiently heavy on energy that it can afford to spend energy on drawing cards as opposed to simply activating a Marvel. And if it finds you a Marvel, then so much to the better. Anguished Unmaking the pickup there for Chris Fennell, so his A plan of beatdown may have been blunted, but he still has a way of making Yuuya Watanabe's life a little bit tricky with an appropriate removal spell. I guess that when Yuuya Watanabe was considering his sideboarding, there are a few options to go with, because he knows that there is this potent removal against his threats. One option that you sometimes see players use is, I call it the kind of the protect the queen strategy. Play your big threat and then have appropriate counter magic to stop your opponent's answers. It'll be interesting to see whether or not that's the way that Yuuya Watanabe went, or if he went for a different option. Goes for Torrential Gearhulk there. He's going to get Glimmer of Genius off it, but he does lose his big 5/6 flash creature.
You are 18.
So big turn there for Yuya, even though his Torrential Gearhulk was met with an Anguished Unmaking from Chris Fennell. It's really, really painful for Chris to have to spend his kind of like wild card in that way. You know, he'd much rather be able to apply pressure and sit on that Anguished Unmaking to meet an Ulamog or an Aetherworks Marvel later on. And of course, Yuya also getting to draw a whole bunch of cards off of Glimmer of Genius from the Torrential Gearhulk, just putting him way up on card advantage. Chris Fennell both behind on cards and stuck on land and unable to mount an offense here. Things are looking really good for Yuuya Watanabe here.
Rogue Refiner draws a card, generates energy, which means that Shielded Aether Thief can draw a card. Watanabe here, intent on keeping his hand well stocked with power, and he's got Ulamog in hand. It's just a matter of drawing the lands to be able to cast it. And if there's one thing I'm confident of, it's that Yuuya Watanabe is going to be good at drawing cards in the next turn or two.
Just look at how stocked Yuya's hand is here. He's got basically everything that Chris can do covered. You know, he's got Censor with Chris being stuck on land. He's got removal spells. He's got counter spells. He's got more ways to draw cards, and eventually working his way up to casting Ulamog, even if he doesn't find a faster way to produce it in terms of Aetherworks Marvel.
14.
Shrine of the Forsaken Gods in hand is also a nice addition when it comes to making sure that Ulamog does get cast. 8 mana available right now, but that can jump up to 10 with just 1 land drop from Watanabe.
And how frustrating must it be getting censored, getting your 3-drop censored when your opponent has 8 lands and 7 cards in hand?
I can't begin to imagine.
Just that frustrating feeling of being behind on so many axes at once.
And Chris Fernell choosing to block there, and that means that when Ulamog comes down, only 1 set of targets, those being lands, and that's enough for Chris Fernell. Going down to 1 land, not enough for him. He extends the hand. He had a fantastic run in the Swiss, but that run is now over. Yuuya Watanabe of Team Musashi picking up the 3-0 sweep, and it was 3-0 sweeps in both of our first quarterfinals for these Team Aetherworks Marvel decks.
Yeah, that's actually surprising to me thinking about it in those terms, Tim, that like it seemed like we saw some very entertaining, some very back and forth games there. They were definitely some fantastic games of Magic, but in the end, it did end 3-0 in favor of both of the Aetherworks Marvel decks that round.
Yeah, very, very powerful stuff from some real veterans of the game that know what they're doing and are able to execute their plan very well indeed. We do, of course, have 2 more quarterfinals for you soon enough, and we will just be setting them up for you. But first, these messages.
Welcome back to the news desk. What an amazing set of quarterfinals. Martin Müller 3-0 over Christian Calcano. Yuuya Watanabe 3-0 over Chris Fennell. You could call it a marvelous first set of quarterfinals, but then again, I'm no Rich Hagan. Martin Müller, one of our victors, just 20 years old, his birthday on Friday. What a wonderful birthday present it is to win your first match in the top 8. Our very own Brian David Marshall is down on the floor with him right now.
Thanks, Maria. I'm here with Martin Müller. Martin, for the first time in your career, you can say you are a Pro Tour semifinalist. How does it feel to get that first quarterfinal win under your belt?
It feels way better than getting destroyed in 20 minutes like last time. So that's really nice to get the first win.
So talk to me about that game 3, because that seems like about as good an opening as Christian Calcano could script against you. Have you had to win a game like that before?
I haven't won any game where I got lost legacy tries, but I've won plenty of games without Untitled Chapter, just being this normal game, even sometimes with the 2-3 that makes Fabdos, and sometimes with trackers. It's pretty easy to win a normal game with this deck.
And that's part of the appeal of this deck for you, is that you have enough threat diversity?
Yeah, exactly. I don't think it would be good if you just was stone cold, if people just killed your marvels.
Now, anybody at home who's watching along, I know I saw you were getting ready for this interview, your phone was kind of blowing up, and who's at home watching and cheering you on this weekend?
I think my mom and dad is for sure watching, and my girlfriend and her family is also watching on a TV screen at home, so that's pretty cool.
All right. You want to say hello to anyone?
Yeah. Hej så. Går det godt?
All right. Hopefully that was PG rated. Thanks, Martin Müller. Good luck in the semifinals.
Thanks so much, BDM. Let's take a look at our bracket as we look forward to quarterfinal 3 and 4, but let's review what just happened. There you see quarterfinal 1, Chris Fennell versus Yuuya Watanabe. Yuuya Watanabe got that 3-0 over Chris Fennell. Of course, Martin Müller, Christian Calcano was our second quarterfinal. Martin Müller, once again, 3-0 over Christian Calcano. So let's look ahead to quarterfinal 3. We've got Ken Yukihiro versus Hall of Famer Eric Froelich. Here's a look at Ken Yukihiro, Team Musashi, 28 years old, 246 lifetime pro points, almost $80,000 in lifetime earnings. Pro Tour top 8's 3, Grand Prix top 8's 7. He's a gold pro. He's got a deck here, Black-Green Energy, kind of a blast from the past. We're seeing it here again. Luis, talk us through this.
So this is a deck that we saw kind of debut at Pro Tour Aether Revolt, and it uses these various ways to generate energy with cards like Long Tusk Cub, which take advantage of you having energy. Kind of an interesting new addition, a Bone Picker.
Yes.
The 1-mana 3/2 Death Touch if something has died this turn, and Ken has cards like Walking Ballista, which can send themselves to the graveyard.
Why do you think he chose this deck for this tournament?
It's a proactive deck. A lot of players tend to favor proactive decks going into an unknown meta game, and it's fairly resilient. It is an aggressive deck, but it's like a little more on the mid-range side. It's not like Zombies, which has a bunch of 1-drops. It really starts its curve on 2.
All right, let's take a look at Eric Froelich here, who will be going up against Ken Yukihiro. Eric Froelich playing Teamer Marvel, Team Channel Fireball Ice. This is his 5th Pro Tour Top 8, 33 years old, lifetime earnings. Whew, a cool $200,000 right there. He's a gold pro, first at Grand Prix San Jose in 2015 and Grand Prix Mexico City just the other month, 2017 right there as well. Let's take a look at his deck. As I said, Teamer Aetherworks Marvel. All right, Luis, how does this deck win? I think we know by now, but let's walk through it.
So, like the other Aetherworks Marvel decks, it's trying to play a Aetherworks Marvel on turn 4 and then find an Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger. And this deck is more similar to Yuuya Watanabe's deck list that we just saw getting played out with more spells, Glimmer of Genius, Censor, and then 1 copy of Torrential Gearhulk as well.
So what new toys from Amonkhet has he integrated into this deck to kind of make it more applicable for this tournament?
Cheap interaction. 2 copies of Magma Spray, 4 copies of Censor, ways to interact with, zombies, for example, or Mardu vehicles, so that you don't need a turn 4 Marvel and you can kind of stabilize and cast Glimmer of Genius.
All right, let's take a look at our bracket as we get ready for quarterfinal number 4. Rich, take it away.
Thanks very much, Maria. Thanks very much to Luis Scott Vargas there. He's going to be heading off to the booth for the 4th quarterfinal and 3rd quarterfinal coming right up. And I'm going to be joined here at the desk by Ian Duke as we work our way towards Mark Tobias against Jerry Thompson. So this is the German representative in the top 8, Mark Tobias. It's his first top 8. Why don't we take a look at Mark Tobias for you here. There he is, 29 from Team Eureka. Now, they are building their way towards trying to be in the top 4 teams coming into Kyoto, because the reward for being in the top 4 teams in the team series at the end of this weekend is that all of your team members get to play in Kyoto. So Team Eureka, he's 29, 10,000 lifetime earnings. He's going to at least double that this weekend. 6-0 in draft. Great job by him. One of 6 players with the perfect record. 6-2 and then a couple of draws to safely see him in to the top 8. Let's take a look at his deck. He is playing Teamer Aetherworks Marvel. So this is the 3rd of our Aetherworks lists. Ian, what's going on with this deck?
This is yet another flavor of Teamer Aetherworks Marvel, a bit different from the 2 that we've seen so far here in the quarterfinals. Mark Tobias is actually playing 4 copies of Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger, so very much all in on finding that Ulamog as quickly as possible. He's also got 3 copies of Chandra, Torch of Defiance, not the Chandra that we saw in the previous rounds.
Right, that's the Flame Caller. Now, I want to ask you about this Ulamog, because on the one hand, there's 2 conflicting narratives here as far as I can see. On the one hand, there are players who are spinning the top, they're trying to find Ulamog. So obviously, if you're trying to find Ulamog and you've got only 2 or 3, well, that's nowhere near as good as the 4 that you're allowed. But then the other narrative is the players who are saying, I win so many games when Ulamog's nowhere to be found and it's fine because I've got my Rogue Refiners and my Whirler Virtuoso generating Thopters, and actually, Ulamog's not even that essential to a lot of my match wins. So somewhere that balance there's got to be a sweet spot. Is it 3? Is it 4? How do you see that?
There's a bunch of different ways to go. Yeah, we've seen some of these decks kind of trend more toward a mid-range deck where you have other ways to win. I think Martin Müller's deck, in my mind, is kind of going this approach with Chandra Flamecaller. We've seen some that trend more toward almost like a blue-red control deck with a little bit of green to add some energy, and then the Aetherworks in there. That's Yuya's version of the deck in my mind. And this here with Mark Tobias, his deck is kind of a little bit more focused on the combo. So we've got they're all combo decks, but there's like the mid-range combo, the control combo, and the combo flavors, if you will.
Yeah, it's worth bearing in mind that Mark Tobias has been playing this deck as often as he can. You see him in multiple tournaments. This is not his choice for this week. This is Mark Tobias' idea of the best deck in Standard for him all the time. So he's super practiced with this deck. Now, on the other side of the battlefield is Jerry Thompson of the United States. Why don't we take a look at Jerry? 32 from Team Mutiny, ratcheting up the standings this weekend. They are really floating on air this weekend. 32 years old, 73,000 lifetime earnings. This is his 3rd Pro Tour Top 8. He's a Gold Pro, couple of Grand Prix titles to his name, and of course known as a fantastic deck builder. What has he brought to the party this time? Well, it's MBZ, Mono Black zombies. Let's take a look at the list for Jerry Thompson for you. And as we know, we've got two different flavors of zombie packages in this top 8. White, black for Chris Fennell, but Chris Calcano and now Jerry Thompson with mono black. So let's take a look at those. Ian, what's happening here?
This is very similar to what we saw out of Christian Calcano in one of our previous quarterfinal matchups here. This is the streamlined version of the deck. There's no white mana here, just trying to get on board as quickly as possible, make sure it's hitting its curve. It plays 4 copies of Relentless Dead, is a card that mono black zombies gets to play, so a little bit more resilience against sweepers and removal there. 4 copies of Dark Salvation, so able to interact with early mana creatures and rogue refiners, things like that. 3 copies of Liliana's Mastery for a lot of power here, but what this deck is lacking is the ability to interact in meaningful ways with Aetherworks Marvel itself and with Ulamog.
Right, Fatal Push didn't do that, Grasp of Darkness, no, Liliana's Mastery, no. Okay, if you were going to point to one card, because I know this is very much a synergistic deck and there's a lot going on with it where everything works with everything else. If you were going to point to one card in this list that is a game changer, where the board state, the advantage is maybe one way, and then down comes X, and X changes the battlefield, what one card would we look for from the zombies list?
Well, it's actually not a late game heavy hitter, but Crypt Breaker is the card in my mind that makes the biggest difference here. If the zombies deck can stick a Crypt Breaker and just keep drawing cards and drawing cards, that's what really makes its battlefield explode. Now, the other key card here that we might see coming down later on in the game and really changing the nature of the matchup is Westvale Abbey. In the absence of a Whirler Virtuoso, the Marvel deck doesn't have a great way of dealing with Ormondal, the Profane Prince, the reverse side of Westvale Abbey, and so that can sometimes come down and just crack in for 9 damage all of a sudden and really swing the game.
All right, well, we'll see whether Jerry Thompson can keep the battlefield full of zombies, or whether it's going to be Mark Tobiash with the Team of Marvel. Will Ken Yukihiro win one for Black Green Energy? Or will it be Eric Froelich with Aetherworks Marvel? It's time for quarterfinals 3 and 4 here at Pro Tour Amonkhet.